There are many ways to measure a man: by fame, by fortune, by the noise of the crowd. But sometimes the truest measure is found in the quiet moments, in how he treats others when no one is watching, in the faith that guides him when the lights go out. Elvis Presley was called the king of rock and roll, but to those who really knew him, he was something gentler. A man who never forgot his roots. A man who carried faith like a lamp in the dark. And this is the story of that light, of the prayers, the gospel songs, the quiet hands folded backstage, of the faith that built the man behind the legend. Before the music, before the fame, there was church, a small wooden chapel in Tupelo, Mississippi, where the heat made the hymns rise like smoke through open windows. Little Elvis would sit beside his mother, listening to the voices, rich, aching, alive. That was where he first learned that music could be holy, that song could be a prayer. He didn't grow up in luxury, he grew up in hope. And in the south of his childhood, hope often sounded like gospel. His mama Gladys would hum Amazing Grace while she worked, and he'd join in, his voice small but full of feeling. He never forgot that sound or what it meant. Later in life, he'd say, all the good music came from the church. That wasn't a line, that was his truth. Fame hit him like a storm. Crowds, cameras, demands that never ended. But no matter where the road took him, Elvis carried a little Bible. He read it between shows, he quoted it to friends, and when the weight of fame grew heavy, he turned to it, not as a symbol, but as an anchor. There are stories, whispered, remembered, of him gathering his band before a concert and saying, let's sing one for the Lord. Not for publicity, not for applause, just for peace. Sometimes when the show ended and the fans were gone, the room would still echo with gospel. Elvis at the piano, eyes closed, singing, How Great Thou Art. And if you listen to those recordings now, you can hear it. The moment when performance became prayer. He recorded over 700 songs in his lifetime, but when he sang gospel, something different happened. His voice softened, his face changed. He wasn't performing anymore, he was testifying. His gospel albums weren't a business move, they were necessary. Between the noise of fame and the ache of loneliness, he needed that sacred space. He won his only Grammys for gospel music, not for Hound Dog, not for Jailhouse Rock, but for He Touched Me, How Great Thou Art, and Crying in the Chapel. And maybe that says everything, because even the world that made him a pop idol could still recognize the holiness in his voice. People saw the glamour. What they didn't see were the quiet nights in Graceland, when Elvis was sitting in his room surrounded by spiritual books, the Bibles, the teachings, even writings from Eastern faiths. He was searching, always searching, for the same peace he sang about. Friends said he'd call them in the middle of the night to talk about God. He'd quote scripture, then ask, You think the Lord ever gets tired of hearing from me? And they'd laugh, because they knew he was sincere. He never claimed perfection. He wrestled with fame, with pressure, with his own demons, but even in his struggles, he turned towards grace. He once told a close friend, I know I'm not everything I should be, but I'm trying to get closer to him. And in that single sentence, you can hear that humility that defined his faith. Elvis didn't preach with words. He preached with kindness. He bought strangers cars, paid hospital bills, gave away jewelries and homes. Not for the headlines, but because generosity was how he expressed his gratitude. He saw need and he filled it. He saw pain and he tried to ease it. One of his friends said, Elvis couldn't stand to see anyone sad. He thought if he could give them something, maybe he could make it right. That's faith in action. The kind that doesn't need attention. He once told a man who thanked him, "Don't thank me. The good Lord's been good to me, and I'm just passing it on." It wasn't just about gifts. It was about grace. His generosity was his prayer. Faith isn't tested when life is easy. And Elvis's faith was tested by fame, by loneliness, by exhaustion. There were moments when he felt far from God, and yet he always came back to the music. Listen to the '68 comeback special, that raw, live, electric performance. When he closes with, "If I Can Dream," you can feel him reaching for something divine. He wasn't just singing about hope for the world. He was singing about hope for himself. "If I can dream of a better land," it's not just a lyric. It's a prayer in disguise. Even when the world thought he was fading, Elvis's heart stayed fixed on faith. He prayed before every show. He carried a cross in his pocket. And when his body grew weary, his spirit never stopped yearning. There's a story from one of his last tours. He was about to go on stage and whispered to a friend, "Lord, let me give them something good tonight." That's all he ever wanted, to give something good. When he sang Peace in the Valley, it sounded like a goodbye wrapped in belief. He was tired, but he was still faithful. Faith for Elvis Presley was never a showpiece. It was a compass. A soft voice that reminded him who he was, even when the world tried to tell him otherwise. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he never stopped believing in love, in God, in redemption. He once said, "When I sing gospel, I feel as I'm singing to God, not to the people." Maybe that's why those songs still move us, because they weren't just performances. They were confessions of the soul. And maybe that's why we still love him, because even at his most human, Elvis Presley showed us something divine. He showed us that faith isn't about how loudly you preach, but how quietly you love. He showed us that grace doesn't belong in churches alone. It belongs in every act of kindness, every humble word, every moment of forgiveness. And in the end, his light still shines, not just from the stage, but from the heart of a man who believed, who stumbled, who prayed, and who never stopped trying to do good in the eyes of God.